What's up, guys? Today we're going to talk about the geography of ancient Greece and the effects that had on the ancient Greek civilization as well as the Western civilization that emerged from it. All right, guys. So when we're talking about ancient Greece or Hellas, what we're referring to is not just the nation state of Greece, which encompasses this area, but we're really talking about the extent of the Greek speaking peoples, people who shared a common language, common culture, ethnicity. So while the Greek civilization was concentrated here in mainland Greece, and we have down here the Peloponnesian Peninsula, which is where Sparta famously arose. Sparta is down here in this left between Mount Taygetus over here and the larger mountain range that scoops up here. In the 7th century, the Spartans ranged across this mountain range to get into Messenia, where over the course of 2 wars they subjugated the Messenian population and turned them into a population of slaves. Further up in the Peloponnesus, you have Corinth here, which guards the Peloponnesus from the Isthmus of Corinth, which was an incredibly important passageway between the bulk of mainland Greece and Asia above it, Europe and Asia above it, and the Peloponnesus down below. During the Persian invasions, the last hope of the Greeks, should it come to it, was to blockade the Isthmus of Corinth and hold out down here in the Peloponnesus. Over here we have Attica, is this region with Athens at its center, the island of Euboea. Over here is the region known as Boeotia. Its largest city, Thebes, was a constant enemy and rival of Athens. Thebes is around here. Above this is the region of Thessaly. Thessaly is the border region between the kind of major Greek populations below and the barbarian populations above. Thessaly is the home of witches in Greek mythology and really Greek history. They continued to think that Thessaly was really this borderland between the cultivated, civilized Greek-speaking people and the barbarians above. Barbarians, of course, being those who spoke with barbaric tongues, sounding like bar, 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 rather than speaking the very refined Greek language. Over here we have the Chalcidice, and this is Thrace up above. Macedon is here. Famously, Alexander and his father Philip II would come from there. However, the Greek world, Hellas, was far larger than that, and it extended to the Cycladic Islands, these islands in the Aegean, and in the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, the Greek city-states, or polis, which is the plural of polis, expanded, and they colonized a lot of different areas. So one of the main places they colonized is the region known as Ionia, which are these peripheral regions of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, like the island of Lesbos. The very important city Miletus is down here. Down south is Crete, which is where King Minos, of course, lived. Corcyra here will play a very important part at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War, which started in 431 BC. Another hugely important area of Greek civilization was called Magna Graecia, or Big Greece, and these were colonies across the boot of Italy and Sicily. Syracuse down here is a very important and very large polis. However, Greek civilization extended all the way across the Mediterranean. There is an important city, Marseille, which is here, and that was founded by the Greeks as Massilia, but their reach really extended all the way to the Pillars of Hercules in modern-day Gibraltar in the west, and in the east, it extended into the Black Sea region, and there were Greek polis all throughout the littoral or coastal regions of the Black Sea, and especially down into the Hellespont over here. There was a number of Greek polis on this little fringe. If you look, you can tell why this is such a strategically important part. All shipping had to pass through this incredibly narrow channel here, through the Bosporus, which is this body of water, and then through. It's incredible that this happened in human history, but that geography would have such a narrow mouth in between the Mediterranean, and the Black Sea above. And of course, the Greeks founded Byzantium in here, which would later become Constantinople. So one thing that you'll notice with this satellite view, and I'm going to change it to the topographic view very soon, is how mountainous and fragmented the Greek polis, or the Greek land, was. So as I change this to the terrain view, I want you to take note of how topographically broken up Greece is. First off, of course, we have just tons of islands in the Aegean Sea, each one of them housing at least one distinct polis, many of them having several. On Lesbos, you had Mytilene, which was the biggest city. Let's see if it will pop up. It doesn't look like it. No, there we go, Mytilene, but also a number of other polis on that island. But in mainland Greece as well, you have incredible barriers to travel and trade, which encouraged a lot of seafaring. Not only is every Greek city-state within an hour, or not an hour, a day's journey of the coast, but there is a lot of reason to go the maritime route rather than trying to walk. So if you look, we've got this handy measured distance. We're going to go straight into the middle of the thickest region of Greece, so the Peloponnesus. And we're just going to drag. And you'll see that we're never more than really 30 to 50 miles in any direction from the water. And this means that there's a constant impulse or a constant demand to take the sea route rather than overland route. So that's the first, or one of the first constraints on, or impetuses on, the Greek people, is that maritime trade is really important, and travel, the navy, these are all going to play a really important role in Greek development. But additionally, you have just such topographically diverse areas, and in no place is there wide flat areas of the kind that you see in, say, France or China for the development of staple grain agriculture. Now, what I mean by this are crops like wheat or barley that in other cultures provide something like 90% of the calories for much of its history. So I'm going to zoom out real quick, and we're going to look at the classic European classic European civilization that many people study, which is France. And if you look at France, it is completely flat. And for this reason, France was for a long time a very populous, and indeed the most populous kingdom in Europe, because they had the ability to grow so much grain. They were also, ever since the conquest of Julius Caesar, they were a single political unit. And yes, sometimes they would get divided and conquered. And of course, in this area that borders Germany, Germans or German-speaking peoples would take over parts, or you had the English taking over a large area in the west at one point. But for the most part, there was the Kingdom of France that never fragmented like Germany did into 350 different little statelets and principalities. In Greece, that is not the case. In the high watermark of classical Greece in the 5th century BCE, you have over 1,000 distinct polis. And one of the main reasons for that is how mountainous this is. Even in Boeotia, where Thebes is the capital, where you have this, it's famously fertile, and the Thebans are farmers who produce a lot of the grain. If you look at it, they actually didn't produce that much. There's one small region right in the middle here that can have these expansive grain fields, but it's let's see, it's not even that wide. So we're talking 11 miles wide, maybe by 15, 20 miles that way. So the Greek landscape is incredibly fragmented, and this encouraged them to not only colonize the surrounding areas, but to range far and wide. And the major reason that they went up to the Black Sea over here is the Black Sea region in modern-day Ukraine is the most fertile, largest area of arable land in Europe. And this is one of the main reasons that Hitler was um, so encouraged and incentivized to move east, is that the grain belt of Ukraine, the Black Earth, was a way for him to achieve his goals of autarky, of self-sufficiency. So the Athenians famously had a number of colonies in this area to supply them with grain, because Athens could not support itself with all the calories that its burgeoning, very large population required. So what we have here is a geography that incentivizes a number of things. The first thing is it incentivizes or requires the agricultural cultivation of not staple grains, but cash crops and commodities. So with the hilly terrain, you have the ability to grow vines like grapes and olives. Sheep and goats are also going to be the main animals that are cultivated, rather than cows, which is the main farm animal in much of Western Europe. And these are crops and animals that create food that is readily available for purchase, right? So you can't subsist just on wine and cheese, although that sounds pretty good. But you can sell that on the market for a pretty penny. And in return, you're going to get money that you then spend on cheaper wheat. So that's really what happened, especially in Athens and throughout the Greek world, is they produced goods for market to then be traded across the Aegean Sea, across the Mediterranean. And so all of these farmers, they became more like merchants than the typical peasant farmer that you see throughout the rest of European history. That they're providing for the market rather than for their own subsistence. That's one of the most important aspects of the ancient Greek economy. The second most important aspect, equally important, is how many different polis there were. Between the islands, between all the different geographic regions of Greece, you had such a diversity of small city-states rather than a single large cohesive kingdom that didn't emerge until the Macedonian conquest in the 4th century BCE under Philip II, and then of course his son Alexander the Great. All right, so let's zoom out and talk about the effects that geography had on the ancient Greek civilization and then the civilizations that followed from it. The first thing that I've already mentioned is that you have the creation of a common class of, I almost want to call them proto-capitalists. They're more merchant than peasant. And so this means that these people are working for themselves. They are interacting with the market. They're interacting with other people. And this creates a number of different effects. The first one is that it leads to the idea of individuality and agency. People believe that they are working for themselves, that they are free to make decisions, and this really cultivates the idea of individual liberty, which for us we kind of take it for granted, but back then every other kingdom or political unit was very much a top-down hierarchy. So when the Persians invade in 490 and 480 BCE, you have an absolutist monarch, a god king, a king of kings, who is trying to subjugate the Greek population. And at the Battle of Thermopylae, the King Leonidas of the Spartans is offered to take command of Greece if he only sets down his weapons and surrenders. And Leonidas says no. He absolutely refuses. And you might be thinking, this sounds great. As the king of the Spartans, you are being offered a much more august, more powerful position. But to Leonidas, it did not seem like that. In fact, he was going to be giving up the liberty of himself and his people to a higher order barbarian who was going to dictate how things would operate in Sparta, even if they were left relatively alone. It really struck them the wrong way, because there was this entrenched sense of personal and political liberty, that your own person and your polis was free from outside interference. This also created the idea of intersubjectivity, right? So if you have people trading with a lot of other people, coming into contact with people from far and wide, right? You have people in Corinth or in Athens traveling to Sicily, to Marseille, for example, all the way into the Ionian, the Black Seas. They're coming into contact with many, many people, far more than the average person throughout history, right? Remember that the average person throughout settled civilizational history, since we set down roots and started to farm, the average person only traveled about 7 to 9 miles from the very spot they were born. The Greeks were very different. They traveled far and wide, trading throughout the Mediterranean. And this brought them into contact with so many other people with different worldviews, beliefs. And one really cool thing about polytheism, which the Greeks practiced, is that unlike monotheism, polytheism had room for everyone. I've already got 300 gods, what's 10 more? So, oh, your god, Artemis, sounds a lot like my god, the other goddess of the hunt, or the goddess of the moon, whatever, that works, right? So you have this idea of syncretism, where the Greek and the Egyptian religions really merged and saw a lot of parallels. They didn't fight about it. They in fact said, oh, you're just worshiping a different mode of the same god or goddess that I am. But this idea of meeting a bunch of different people meant that the differences between people's worldviews was very stark. And so they had this idea of intersubjectivity, and that I have certain opinions that are not shared, which is, again, very different from a lot of other people in different areas where you're in one place for a long time, there's one religion, everyone you know worships that religion, believes the same thing. And the Greeks were not like that. And so this is one of the main reasons that prompted them to develop logic and a formal sense of discussion and debate to get to the bottom of things. They understood that there were differences of opinion, and so there was a huge emphasis on speaking to other people, having these conversations where the goal of the conversation was to come to an agreement, or at least hash out your views in almost competitive nature with someone else to get to the bottom of what is true about the external world around you. And Aristotle, of course, then created formal logic, which is a way to understand who wins an argument based on a set of principles that starts from the very beginning, progresses to an end point. And this would not have come from another society or civilization that had, say, a communal system of agriculture where everyone worked together and strove for harmony rather than divergence of opinion. The other main thing that I've talked about that really informs Greek thought is this fragmented geography, which creates myriad polis. And what that leads to is a diversity of different regimes. You have 1,000 different city-states all vying with each other in war, but also in commerce and across different areas. And what this leads to is the experimentation with a lot of different political regimes. One of the reasons I love ancient Greece and I love to study it is that within a very small microcosm, right, like about 200 years in this expanse of territory, you have aristocracies, you have oligarchies. The difference between them is aristocracies are much more about blood, heredity. I descended from Hercules, of course, and oligarchies are like, I'm rich, so I rule this place. But still, they're both a small group of people exerting influence and power over their city-state. You have tyrannies, which are typically when the aristocracy or oligarchy has abused its power, and the people rise up against the ruling coalition with a single leader who is typically from that aristocracy. And one important thing to note about the polis are that they are all very small, right? They're not, because of the geography, they're all very small areas of land, which doesn't only mean geographic size, but also population size. Athens is about the biggest one with 30 to 50,000 adult male citizens, so a total population of around 250,000, and that is very large. The vast majority of these are several hundred people, maybe a few thousand, which means that politics is consensual. So when an oligarchy abuses its power, it's very easy for a disenfranchised member of the upper class to say, screw this, and start talking to the people. And the people, because it's such a small size, are able to get on board with each other and rise up in revolution. And this is really what starts the first democracy, of course, in Athens, which is the people have been so burned by a tyranny beforehand under the Pisistrated dynasty and the attempt by the Spartans to impose an oligarchy that they band together and throw off the chains of autocracy to create the first democracy. And democracy then spreads throughout the Greek world because it seems like such a good idea, and because the politics are so small that the people themselves are able to throw off the yoke of the ruling class. The consensual politics also feeds back into this individualistic society where because the population is so small that even in an autocracy, in an oligarchy, or in a tyranny, the ruling class needs to convince the people that they are legitimate. And so even a tyranny or a tyrant who supposedly is ruling in an autocratic manner still needs to compel and convince his citizens that they should follow him, that the rules that he's putting in place, the programs he's enacting are just, because it's so easy for the population to rise up and overthrow him. He needs to get them on board, and this further incentivizes the idea of public debate, of speaking to crowds, and the art form of rhetoric, of speaking to persuade your fellow people, comes out of this Greek world. The final thing that comes out of this way of thinking is the invention of nature. And you might be like, what the hell is he talking about? How can you invent nature? But it's actually incredibly rare, if it exists anywhere else, that a population divides themselves, the human world, the artificial world, from that of the world around them. That there is a human sphere and there is a natural sphere. Most other civilizations just view it all as there, right? It's all nature. We are part of it. The Greeks did not, and it comes back to that subjectivity where there is this inner world that I know, that's my own thinking, but it is fallible. And then there's this external objective world that I seek to understand. And what this then leads to is the inquiry about the world around them. Most other civilizations throughout history just took the world for granted, and the Greeks did not. They invented natural philosophy, which is the precursor to science, of how does the world work? What is it? And how can I find out about it? And if you go forward 2,000 years to the 1500s, at the beginning of the scientific revolution, it's this same questioning that prompts all of the progress that we've seen since then. For a very long time, it was very easy for people to just look at the world around them and accept it as is. That time is a circle, the world is constant, there are no real big changes, things just happen in cycles. And it wasn't until the discovery of the Americas and the realization that we are not the center of the universe, but in fact the sun is, that these both happened, the discovery of Americas, of course, 1492, and then the Copernican revolution of realizing that we are not the center of the universe in the 16th century, changed everything, because people all of a sudden realized that we didn't know everything, that there were these huge concepts out there that we did not know, and that provoked people to start questioning the world. Is this really the case? Is that true? If so, how do we know? And if you think about the scientific method, the first step is not a hypothesis out of nothing. It is to question. And it's this idea of questioning that goes back all the way to ancient Greece, realizing that you don't know everything, there's more to learn around you, and that you need to ask about the universe in order to fully understand it. Thank you.